I hate to break it to folks, but there's no magical Deus Ex Machina device that is going to get you out of this one. So, this is a indirect follow-up a bit to the video that I made talking about the planned reboot or remake, or however you want to consider it, readaptation of the original Harry Potter books being done as a TV series on HBO. Sorry, just Max now. God, that's so dumb. But there was something that I didn't really touch on, but people brought up in the comments a lot. And it is a thing for me every now and then where something happens in the comments so often that I hit a point of, okay, I'm just going to do it. Rather than reply to all these in text, I'm just going to do a video. Just going to do a video explaining the problem with this thought process. The thing I kept running into were various permutations of, wouldn't it be great if JK Rowling would sell the property? And some people even wording it like it was an inevitability that Warner Brothers would purchase it or should purchase it. But like a general desire from a certain stripe of fan, i.e. people who recognize the damage that JK Rowling is doing, which I am not going to be getting into in this video. If you don't agree with me on that, I don't know what to tell you. I've done other videos on it. We're taking it as a given here. But people who recognize that, but also still hold on to a love of Harry Potter, which, first of all, it's a position I'm very sympathetic to. I was there for a little while. It was, I don't know, about a month between her original essay in 2020 and when I took the Harry Potter stuff off my shelf. It was over a year, 2 years before I actually packed up the books themselves and put them away. I haven't gotten rid of any of this stuff because most of them were gifts, so I still have an attachment to them as something given to me by someone who I care about and who cares about me, even if I don't want to look at them anymore. So I understand holding on to a love of these things. I do get it. And I understand how just disagreeing with her, not only just disagreeing, but recognizing the damage she's doing, but still feeling love for this puts you in a really awkward position. And in that position, the desire or the idea even that she could somehow no longer be directly attached to this property, that's very appealing. It's also not going to happen. Like at all. Like ever. Like in our lifetimes. Now, there is obviously always the tiny possibility that I'm wrong on this, but I'm going to be spending the next, I don't know how long, giving you all the reasons why I don't think I am. So there's a number of things that we need to understand. First is a little bit about how copyright and licensing works. The intellectual property, or IP, that is Harry Potter, is owned by JK Rowling. She was the original creator of it. She owns the copyright to that IP. Warner Brothers licenses that IP for the purposes of films, video games, and now, moving forward, television. Now, another thing that I'm just going to touch on real briefly, there is also the park, but it really needs to be emphasized because a lot of people didn't seem to get this either. Warner Brothers doesn't run the attraction that Harry Potter is attached to because that's in Universal Studios, which is owned by NBC Universal, which is a completely different company. And they also have a separate license agreement. Now, part of what they're licensing is both the IP, but also Warner Brothers' specific adaptation of it. So Warner Brothers probably does get a piece of that, but they don't run that. And Universal would still, in theory, be able to maintain that license through their own agreements, even if Warner Brothers ever lets go of or loses the license to Harry Potter. So another thing, just to pick up on that last video I did on this, if Warner Brothers ever lets go of the license, which my prediction was if they can't get the full 7 seasons out of this readaptation, then they will let it go because this is the one thing that should absolutely work. And if it doesn't, they will make the decision to cut their losses, is my belief. If they do, they don't lose the rights to what they've already made. That's their product. They will retain the rights to those movies, those films, and that game, which is published under Warner Brothers, the Hogwarts Legacy game. They simply will lose the license to be able to make any more of that. And they'll probably also lose merchandising rights and other stuff. But the actual things that they made, movies, TV shows, etc., they'll continue to own that. That's their thing. But they wouldn't be able to make any more. Those rights would revert back to JK Rowling. So the idea of her no longer holding the rights, well, let's first of all acknowledge the fact that the degree to which she is personally involved in anything has nothing to do with the fact that she gets a financial incentive for licensing it out. Now, this is relevant to Hogwarts Legacy, because one of the arguments that people would sometimes try to make when I would point out that buying that game supports transphobia was that she wasn't involved in the game. And from any creative perspective, that's true. She wasn't. But she still got the licensing fee and probably residuals. People would claim she didn't get residuals, and we don't actually know because we don't see these contracts. But the thing is, she's big enough and has a large enough control, and it's a value enough property. Whereas most IP holders of a book series couldn't negotiate for residuals on a per sale basis, she could. And I don't doubt that she did. I would be shocked if she didn't. If she didn't, she needs to fire her lawyer or her agent or whoever it was who presented her with a contract where that wasn't the case, to be honest. But how much she is directly involved with it doesn't impact the fact that it still financially benefits her. And so that brings us to the first reason why she probably won't give it up, which is financial. She gets residuals on every book sale, every film copy, ticket sold. She gets a piece of merchandise from whether it be the parks or anything else, anything officially licensed. Like I said, she probably gets a piece of the video game on a per sale basis. And yeah, that's a lot of money. Now, you can certainly make the argument she doesn't need any more money. When, yeah, that's true. But that doesn't mean that she would just let that go. I think one of the comparisons that folks like to make in regards to at least thinking that she might pass off the rights is George Lucas. But I'll come back to that, because what happened with George Lucas and Star Wars is a little different. Let's cover some other bases before we head down that rabbit hole. So the thing is that for her to no longer have the underlying rights, and again, we're not talking the licensing, we're talking the underlying IP rights, she would have to sell them, or she would have to pass away and we'd have to wait 90 years on top of that, because public domain, generally, it gets weird and wonky in some instances, but as a general rule, it's the life of the author plus 90 years. And when an author passes away, generally, the IP rights, if they have not otherwise been sold, which we'll come back to, they will revert to the children or offspring of the original IP holder. Now, generally, with as much money as would be involved in Harry Potter, there's probably a trust set up to handle her eventual, inevitable passing away, because we all do. And that will then manage it. You can find a lot of things about how, say, the Tolkien estate either was or wasn't pleased with various adaptations of J.R.R. Tolkien's work, various Middle-earth related things, because that estate, that trust, continues to manage those IP rights. Now, that's the first thing. They do sort of go down the line like any owned asset would. That is assuming that she hasn't sold the rights wholly, which is something that, say, George Lucas did with Star Wars. And George Lucas is an interesting one to pull, because on the one hand, he's one of the few instances of another individual person who wholly owned the entirety of the IP. Because generally, what you tend to get is you get, authors own the intellectual property rights to the thing that they wrote, but few things ever get as big as Harry Potter or as Star Wars. And generally, when you've got something that's primarily a film franchise like Star Wars, the IP rights are actually held by the studio. But those, when he was directing them at least, were all actually technically independent productions after that first one. Only the first one was a studio film, and the rest were independent productions. And part of him getting that first one made was he took a lower fee, but retained more of the rights. And That's how George Lucas managed to keep control of the thing until he sold it. So yes, it is possible for an IP holder to sell the intellectual property, the underlying rights, and to sell those to either another person or, far more likely, an entertainment conglomerate that will then milk them for as long as they possibly can. Now, as I said, while there are some reasons to compare George Lucas to JK Rowling, I also can't imagine her letting go of the rights for the reason that he did. Because, first of all, remember, while he sold Star Wars, and well, technically he sold Lucasfilm and the rights to Star Wars and Indiana Jones and a bunch of other stuff, while those were sold for billions of dollars, he also donated pretty much all that to charity. He didn't want the money, but like it was how it was going to be, formalized, and he tried to do some good with it after the fact, but he definitely didn't need the money. And so he also clearly didn't need the money for the residuals. But the thing was, George Lucas seemed kind of done with Star Wars. It really did seem like part of the reason for him to pass on. It's not that he didn't care about it at all anymore, but he didn't want to have the obligation to keep managing it. Because it was his, if anything was going to be done with it in the future, he would have to be involved in. He just seemed to want to do other stuff, or at the very least not be doing that all the time. And JK Rowling, I know she's been writing other stuff, but she keeps coming back to Harry Potter. At the time that George Lucas sold Star Wars, he'd finished with making any actual Star Wars stuff himself over a decade ago. Rowling's still trying to get stuff done and made. We've got this readaptation, which she is directly involved in. And even before that, we had the Fantastic Beasts movies, which she was directly writing the screenplays for. So she doesn't seem to be done. So there just doesn't seem to be a reason. And I mean, also keep in mind, George Lucas is a fair bit older than her. So if she's ever going to be like, I'm done and I'm tired, if you're using George Lucas as a comparison, it's probably a couple of decades worth before that is even really viable. But as I said, money doesn't really make sense to me as an incentive, honestly, for her to either keep it or sell it. She doesn't need more money now, which is what you would get for selling it, whereas the residuals are a constant thing. And she doesn't really need the long term, because unless she somehow gets taken in, I don't know, an NFT scam or something, like she's never going to be hurting for money, ever. So money's not really the issue here. Well, it's not for her anyway. It might be for Warner Brothers Discovery, but again, I will come back to that. No, I think the bigger issue here is clout. Her relevance in pop culture, no matter how much she tries to make her thriller series a thing, and it's really not going well. You may have seen a headline a couple of weeks back saying that the profits of her production company were down like 70 some odd percent. It's worth noting that has nothing to do with Harry Potter, because her production company manages her thriller series and adaptations of that, and that's what is down. So like, she keeps trying to make that a thing. It's not really working. So she's not gonna get a ton of clout off that. But like, when I say clout, what do I mean by that? Why would she want that? What is she using that for? Well, to attack trans people is what she's using it for. But the thing is, that's what her platform is based off of. And she has made it her full-time job practically at this point to be on Twitter or to be in interviews claiming to be attacked and actively attacking trans people, particularly trans women and trans rights. Again, I'm not trying to go down this rabbit hole again. Don't ask me to cite you examples. Do your own looking into stuff. I've done videos. Other people have done videos. I'll put links in the description, okay? If you want stuff to look for. There you go. There's your resources. Go. But if we accept that, which hopefully if you're still watching, you do. If we accept that that is what she's doing, the reason she has the platform she does, the reason she is listened to as much as she is, the reason that she keeps coming up and she's trending like almost every other freaking day on Twitter is because she is also the IP holder of Harry Potter. Now, would she suddenly become irrelevant if she was not the current active owner? No, she wouldn't. But the fact that she is, the fact that she isn't detached from Harry Potter means that every time Harry Potter trends or every time there's an announcement related to Harry Potter, she gets to ride that for attention, for her views. And even if you think that her views are a good thing, even if you think that, I think you have to grant me, she absolutely rides any Harry Potter news as a way and an opportunity and a time to push her beliefs more. It's part of what keeps her trending, because while she will always be the creator, and while nobody can ever take that away from her, and she'll always have some clout for that, the specific conversation about whether or not continuing to engage with Harry Potter supports her and enables what she's doing wouldn't be a conversation anymore if she didn't still own the IP. And the fact that she does means that every time Harry Potter is trending, that conversation trends as well, which means she trends as well, which means people have eyes on her, which means she has a bigger platform for what she's doing. And I think she puts a lot of value in that platform. I think for her, because she believes in the righteousness of what she is doing, that she would view that as priceless. And if she was ever going to put a price on that, which I don't think she would, not at this point in time, if she was going to put a price on that, I don't think Warner Brothers could afford it. Which I think is the last thing. I don't think that, and Warner Brothers would be the prime candidate. Theoretically, somebody else could buy it, but given that, say, Disney, which would be one who could afford it, is being more, at least publicly and superficially supportive of trans people, she might fundamentally not be willing to sell to them as a company. And that's the other thing. You need to remember, her retaining the underlying intellectual property means she has say, and she actually has control over the final product to at least some degree. Because whether she was going to be executive producing this new show or not, she still has a surprising amount of direct power. Like, it was her dictation that for that film series, they not hire any Americans, that it was all actual Brits in that movie. So she has exerted her power before, but if she doesn't own the IP anymore, then she doesn't get to exert that power. They can do something else. They could make a trans-positive message in her world. I don't think she would open herself up to that possibility. But even if she was willing to, the price she would put on it, I don't think any company, especially Warner Brothers, is in a position to pay that. Now, again, maybe some would, maybe some wouldn't. Again, but I really don't think she would ever sell it. But let's just stick with Warner Brothers, because they're the most relevant. They're the ones who've been handling it for the longest. And if she did ever feel like she'd be willing to put a price on it, they're the ones who she'd probably have the most comfort, would not completely redirect or screw up or do something she didn't want. Warner Brothers' big thing right now has been cost cutting. Yeah, they're announcing a lot of projects, but largely DC related, largely stuff that they know there's a built-in market for, but they're removing stuff off of HBO Max. They are cutting this, canceling that, not releasing finished films, all of this in the name of cost cutting. And understand, they're not cutting that cost to redirect funds. They're cutting that cost to cut costs. They are trying to clamp down on their spending, and they're trying to do it hard. And the idea of spending, I can't imagine she'd ask for less than George Lucas got for Star Wars. The idea of spending $4 billion on attaining the IP, and that's before you even start production on any of it, that's just to own it. That's $4 billion in the red, in the hole, just for the purchase. I don't think they can afford it. Now, I especially don't think they can afford it, given what I said in the last video about the state of the property overall, which is that I don't think they have a ton of faith in it right now. I think part of the reason they're doing the TV show is it's the safest bet. The spin-offs weren't great. I saw a ton of the comments. People were like, why aren't we getting a Marauders series? Well, if Fantastic Beasts had done better and was still continuing, maybe they would have done that. But they're going to the safest possible bet, or at least what appears on paper to be the safest possible bet, because I think they're really uncertain about the future of this property. Because if they can't get this TV series to blow up and stay blown up for the entire run of it, then they might not be able to get enough to have it be worth even making more product, much less shelling out to own the entire thing. If you're going to spend that much money, you got to know you're going to make it back. But I don't think they can afford it. And in addition to that, even if they could, I don't think at this point in time, at least, that they have the degree of confidence that would be required for them to pull the trigger on a deal like that. The thing is, if she did sell, we don't really have a metric for what that looks like in terms of the problematic creator no longer being involved in the product, but still being around. Like, the closest we've got is Minecraft and its creator, Notch, who is, I'm not getting into all the stuff with him, but he's revealed himself over the last few years to be a very unpleasant person. And Minecraft continues to thrive. The thing is, he'd sold Minecraft to Microsoft before most of the stuff that has tainted the image of him in people's eyes happened. He sold his controlling stake in Mojang or however it's pronounced to Microsoft in 2014. And it wasn't until 2016 when he started posting stuff and making statements that made people go, hang on a second. So in a lot of ways, Microsoft lucked out because while it may still have tainted the brand in the eyes of some people because it originated with a person they took distaste with, he wasn't involved anymore by the time that happened. Rowling's been around now for going on 3 years since it became undeniable what her positions on trans people were. I know some people do still try and deny it, but, there'll always be some. The thing is, it's not the same situation at all. People have already had to try and reconcile their love of this with their potential severe disagreement of her. And I think the continuation of wanting to try and reconcile that is part of what drives the desire for the idea that she might not control the property during our lifetimes. But again, I don't think that's going to happen. And I know it would be really nice if more creators could be like, say, Neil Gaiman and his work on the Sandman Netflix series, where not only was he open and willing to changes, he specifically was open to changes to things that he felt either didn't age well or he didn't get quite right in the first place. He's admitted to the flaws in his own work, something which Rowling has never done. It's always a little bit of a red flag for me, just broadly speaking, if someone is defending to the hilt creative decisions they made more than a decade, heck, more than 5 years ago, but definitely more than a decade ago. Because, nobody's perfect. And the way that Rowling has responded to forget the trans stuff for a minute, the way that she has responded to criticisms of her work in regards to depictions of things like the house elves and the goblins and anyone who could be considered fat. Those criticisms have always been valid, but she's never come around on them. She either ignores them or defends her choices and her work. She's not going to prove herself to be like Neil Gaiman and open to refitting the work to be more appropriate. Every indication is this series is just going to be about putting even more of the books than was in the movies. And that is potentially going to mean carrying over a lot of problematic stuff that got cut. Again, a lot of the house elf content. I think in a lot of ways the movie's lucked out because they could use the excuse of cutting stuff for time. Whereas the show won't have that excuse. And it's going to be up on screen. And it's going to get real uncomfortable. I think if this thing moves forward, it actually has the potential to shine an even harsher spotlight on some of the flaws in the original work. And again, I loved that book series. I loved those movies. I loved that property. But it was always flawed in many ways. So why did I make this? Why did I feel the need to list off all the reasons why? Look, she's not going to sell it, folks. Because I think some people are clinging to hope. And again, I get why. But I worry that some folks have a reluctance to move on because they're hoping against hope that somebody's going to swoop in and buy this, get it away from her, have her not be involved, have her not get direct residual checks anymore. Something. It's not going to happen. And I think you all need to realize that, because while I think some of you do, and for some of you it was a wistful thought, there were other folks who really seem to be putting a lot of emotional investment in that idea. And I don't think that's a good thing for you. to do. And look, if she ever sells the rights, I'll have a lot to talk about. I will have a lot to discuss and parse and think through about how I feel about supporting that property going forward if she is no longer directly benefiting from it. I don't know what I'll think. Because as I said, it would lower her clout. It would definitely impact her wallet in the long term, though she'll get a big payout initially. But I would no longer be able to make the argument that supporting anything official Harry Potter related directly benefits her. Just like she would no longer be able to make the argument that any sale of Harry Potter stuff is proof that people at the very least tolerate her views, if don't agree with her. And if that's no longer the case, I may have to reassess. And if that ever happens, I'll be here to talk about whatever I end up thinking. But the thing is, part of the reason I don't do a lot of speculative stuff is that I don't have a brain that lets me go too far down a rabbit hole that I think won't ever happen. It's why I'm really bad at sort of how would you rewrite this? Or what story would you do for this property? Or where do you think this will go? Like, I don't know. I'll give you my thoughts when it happens, but I don't know. Just because I can't wrangle my brain to sort out these big what if scenarios, because part of me is going, why are you wasting your time and energy on this? It's never going to happen. And that's me. I know not everybody's like that. And that's why, well, part of why, at least, I suspect some people still cling to that hope. I've said before, and I stand by, that you don't have to give up your love of the property. You don't have to get rid of the Harry Potter stuff you already had. What you can't do, at least not while claiming to support and be an ally to trans people, is continue to buy new things in this property under this IP because it is directly going to somebody who is using the clout, the attention, and also the money to harm us. So, I know it's hard. I know when something you love is continuing to make more, it's hard to turn away from that. Even if you've got the stuff you already love, even if you've got the original books, got the original movies, got merchandise that you purchased before the end of 2020, even if you have all that, you're seeing more made, and it's hard. It is hard to just walk away from that and go, but I love this stuff, and maybe I'll love the new stuff too, and that is a sacrifice. I mean, yeah, first world problems, I get it. It's not a massive sacrifice, but like it is. It does hurt. It hurts to not participate with something that you have a pretty good sense you'd enjoy. It's, again, I don't think an end of the world style issue, but like, it's not a painless thing. I do get it. But if that's the reason you're holding on to this hope, I'm sorry, but I think you might need to burst that bubble. I can't do it for you. I've given you some reasons to maybe consider doing it, but that's something you got to do for yourself. If you're ready. That's it. That's why I don't think she'll ever give up the rights in her lifetime. And it's why I thought I needed to talk about it. What are your thoughts on any of this? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills. It enables me to do this as my living. So if you want to support what I do and my ability to talk to you about this kind of stuff, well, any amount is of great assistance. There's perks at every tier. You're going to hear some names during the credits for some folks who are really helping me out, but don't worry too much about it. What I really want you to remember is that you are beautiful. You are valid. And you are loved. You are the council, and I am just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned. My thanks to all my patrons, but in particular, I want to thank Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Sarvis, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Ruth, Oliver B., Solitary Pictures, Ulrich Bogdan, Melinda Walters, Imudelki, Leotha Boyd, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Phenombulax the Poodle, Robin Powell, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Tim Price, Adam RDL Taylor, Goddess Alida, I'm not sure. David Hall, Shayla Gourlay, Rosalind Bennett. If you want to hear me mess up your name too, it's in the Patreon perks. I gotta work on that.